Hello, welcome to this explainer. I'm just so thrilled you are here with me today because, well, we're tackling something that I know we all feel deeply right now. Let's be real for a second. We're experiencing this shared profound cultural exhaustion. We're living in a world where the ground beneath our feet feels like it's just constantly shifting, doesn't it? Every single day, we're bombarded by these endless streams of information. Breaking news, super loud opinions, expert analysis, social media arguments. It literally never stops. We have access to more information than any generations in human history. And yet, there is this lingering heavy fatigue that comes with just trying to process the whole shebang. Okay, let's dive into this because this question right here, this is the absolute elephant in the room. Why, with all our technology, all our access, does truth feel so incredibly elusive? Well, the reality we need to confront is that our real crisis actually isn't a lack of truth. No, it is a complete and total erosion of trust. We've lost confidence in our institutions. We've lost faith in the media. We doubt our leaders. And honestly, sometimes we even doubt ourselves. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the struggle by looking at two incredibly powerful forces pulling at us, the external world and our internal world. So let's start with Act 1, the external lie, where we learn that the camera always lies. Consider this quote by the British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge: "The camera always lies." Just let that sink in for a second. At first glance, that sounds absolutely ridiculous, right? I mean, think about it. How could a device that was specifically built and engineered to record reality possibly deceive us? It is literally capturing light, bouncing off real objects. There is no way. But if we look a little closer at how a camera is actually used, a completely different reality emerges. You see, a camera never captures everything. It only captures a frame. And that frame, well, it is the result of human decisions. Somebody has to decide exactly where to point to the lens. Somebody decides exactly when to hit record and exactly when to stop. They choose the angle, they choose the lighting, and ultimately they choose which story will be told afterwards. And you know, long before we had AI-generated images or Photoshop, people totally understood this power. There are these legendary stories from the 80s of television interviews being edited so heavily, literally meticulously spliced together, that the final broadcast the public actually saw barely resembled the reality of the conversation. Producers were basically Frankensteining entire interviews before Photoshop was even a gleam in a developer's eyes. An entirely new narrative was manufactured simply by deciding what to leave in and what to cut out. So, what we consume as external truth is almost always filtered through countless human choices. It passes through producers, journalists, corporate doors, and today algorithms and influencers. Every single frame includes something, and every single frame leaves something out. And look, this isn't necessarily some grand conspiracy. It just means human beings with all their biases and blind spots are involved. And when information is filtered through human choices, it gets shaped. It gets shaped by profit, by power, and by ideology. The editor is king. And that, right there, is exactly why people struggle so hard to agree on what reality even is right now. Let's move on and see how this builds into concept number 2, the internal friend and the old friend inside. If the external world is constantly being filtered and framed, where do we turn? Well, we turn inward. As the writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry beautifully captured. The truth that sits inside you is your old friend. It doesn't go anywhere. Beneath the chaotic, totally deafening noise of the outside world, you and I carry deep convictions. We have values. We have a conscience that speaks quietly, but persistently to us about right and wrong. When the external world feels like a raging storm, this inner voice acts as an incredibly powerful anchor. It reminds us of who we are and what truly matters to us. But as focused learners, we absolutely have to look at the other side of this coin. There is a severe danger in relying solely on the internal anchor, and that danger is that human beings are capable of extraordinary self-deception. Listen, just because a feeling is incredibly strong, just because it feels true down in your bones, doesn't automatically make it a fact. You can be absolutely sincere and still be completely wrong. You can be deeply passionate and still be totally mistaken. When we aren't careful, our fiercely held internal beliefs actually stop being an anchor and start becoming shields. Shields that we use to block out actual facts that we simply would rather not face. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it leads us to part 3, the great disconnect, and what happens when those walls drift. When the manipulated external truth and our isolated internal truth collide, we get a massive societal fracture. We see the disconnect playing out perfectly in these two extreme reactions to our broken trust. Over on the left side of the screen, we have paranoia. That's the assumption that every institution is lying and absolutely everything is propaganda. This leaves people incredibly isolated. On the right side, we have blind trust. The assumption that the system just must be trusted completely without any question. And this leaves people incredibly vulnerable to manipulation. Neither of these extremes provides solid ground. And when enough people retreat to these opposite corners, living in completely different versions of reality, having a meaningful, constructive conversation becomes quite literally impossible. Which brings us to part 4, standing firm in the noise. How do we actually keep our feet on the rock when both the world and our own hearts can totally mislead us? So how do we navigate this? Fortunately, there are some highly effective practices. Practice number 1. For finding clarity is to actively compare multiple sources, and specifically sources that vehemently disagree with one another. Look, if everyone in your feed is telling you the exact same story from the exact same angle, you need to go look for someone asking different questions. You don't do this because the dissenting voice is automatically right. You do this because contrast naturally illuminates hidden assumptions. It exposes the frame that the camera is using. Practice number 2 is arguably the most vital skills for the modern age. Separate facts from interpretations. I literally cannot emphasize this enough. The confusion between these two things is the root cause of almost every single toxic argument happening in our society today. We constantly blend the actual event itself with the story being told about the event. And this brilliantly illustrates that crucial distinction. Think of a fact like looking through a magnifying glass. It just answers what happened. It is the raw data, the unedited footage, and interpretation, on the other hand, is like adding a dozen megaphones around it. It answers, what does it mean? That's the narrative applied to the event by an editor, an algorithm, or a politician. As focused learners, we must relentlessly train ourselves to split the raw event from the narrative applied to it. Accept the fact, critically evaluate the interpretation. Finally, practice number 3. Trust your judgment, but actively challenge it. You should absolutely listen to your instinct and respect your lived experience. That old friend insight is valuable, but you've got to stay willing to learn. You must stay willing to ask yourself the difficult, uncomfortable questions. And most importantly, you must stay willing to be corrected when the facts demand it. So, the crucial point is, the goal isn't certainty, the goal is clarity. We spend so much time violently demanding absolute certainty in a wildly chaotic world, when what we really, truly need is a clear-eyed vision to navigate it honestly. To wrap up our explainer today, let's look at the solid ground we've uncovered. The camera, our external world, can easily mislead us with its narrow frames. The heart, our internal world, can easily mislead us with its comfortable biases. But truth itself is never threatened by honest examination. In fact, it's strengthened by it. When we learn to test both the external noise and our internal feelings carefully, we step out of the illusion and into incredibly solid ground. We've talked a lot about testing the light and the lenses today, but I want to leave you with a highly provocative thought. What happens when people decide they just don't want to test the light at all? What happens when you turn the light off completely in a room with a manga? In our next explainer, we are going to dive into a totally fascinating story about a hungry student, a manga, and a very dark room, exploring what happens when we completely surrender to the darkness. You are not going to want to miss it. Until then, keep questioning the frame and keep challenging the heart. Thank you.